Okay, this is a book tutorial for one of my favorite books. It's called WATERSHIP DOWN. And I'm going to talk about how an educator can use this book in your classroom. This is one of those comfort reads. You know, every once in a while you come across a book that you go back to over and over again and just reread it because there's such a payoff when you get to the climactic scene. And that's the case for this. I mean, yeah, it's about rabbits, okay? It's about a bunch of rabbits, but really it's about society. It's about community. And when you read this, if you were to read this as a class, it's a little bit longer. The problem is the style of writing is a little bit older, but I think if you prepare the students properly, that, hey, you know what, it's going to be a little bit more on the old-fashioned style, it's going to actually give them a bit of more formal language. And I think that's necessary because a lot of the language these days, especially with all the texting, which is understandable, it's becoming too colloquial and too, you know what I mean? Okay, basically it's becoming too casual. And they will need to have formal language when they go out into the world. So let them know that this is part of the preparation. Basically, what you can do is look at this book as it's a form of establishing a community. And what you will find is that each of the rabbits, they play a role. They have a specific purpose. And Hazel, who's the main character, there's Hazel and his little brother Fiver. And Fiver is the rabbit who sees things. He's like the mystic. He's like the dreamer. In this book, basically, he forms the role of like a priest, and Hazel is the leader. Now, his leadership from the very beginning is questioned by one of the most favorite characters in the whole book, Bigwig, who is like, oh, just the charming sort of go-getter rabbit. He's called Bigwig because he's got a thatch of fur on his head and everything. They call him Bigwig. And he's just an amazing character. Actually, if you know anything about Islamic history, Bigwig reminds me of Omar ibn al-Khattab. Okay, he was one of the companions of the Prophet, and the Prophet, he was one of the leaders that came afterwards. But Bigwig is he's like the general. Okay, think of Bigwig as the general. So Hazel is the leader, and he's constantly being, especially at the beginning, he's constantly being challenged by Bigwig. And then there's Strawberry, who's kind of like the brawn of the group. Well, Strawberry is actually comes from this other warren that they go to. But there's other like Silver, and there's other. Uh, they're kind of like almost like police. They were from the Ausla. The Ausla is like the Chief Rabbit's kind of police force, and then there's Blackberry, who's like the scientist engineer of the group. So when you're reading when you're reading the book with your students, the language is a little bit more complex, but the payoff, really, it's huge. When they establish this colony, and first of all, Fiverr is the one who warns everybody that there's something really bad coming, that their lives are in danger. So Fiverr, it starts out with him him feeling uneasy, and he sees basically a sign, and the sign is saying that there's going to be a development in that area. Now, I'm not too sure about all of the details of the area. Watership Down, by the way, I think it's probably the dumbest title that Richard Adams could have picked. I think he was going by geography, and he knew this area that this whole story is set. And the setting of the area is very important to him. It's the British countryside. And apparently there is a place called Watership Down, and it's a very high hill, and that's where they end up. The reason why it's called Watership Down is that they end up establishing a colony there. These rabbits, they run away from the Sandalford warren because it's actually under development, and these developers are coming, and they're coming with these gas hoses, and they're going to not just remove the rabbits, they're going to kill them. So Fiverr has this premonition of this, and because of that, he and Hazel decide they're going to flee, and they're going to take as many rabbits that are willing to go with them. So it's kind of a story about survival. But honestly, over the course of the story, with all the challenges that these rabbits face in their survival, it really becomes a story of leadership. In particular, Hazel's leadership. Hazel shows, like the Richard Adams shows, what the real qualities of a leader are. And it's not necessarily strength. Because the fact is, Bigwig is the strongest. There's no doubt that Bigwig is the strongest. Now, it all comes down to, so they established this thing on Watership Down, and then they realized something that they, I don't know how they missed it, and I guess it's because the author is a male, that they realize they don't have any females, and they need to get some females, otherwise their warren is doomed. So they need to find some female rabbits that are going to be willing to come with them, and they end up going to finding another warren nearby. There's all kinds of different things that happen. One of the warrens that they come across, it's really creepy. It's a very creepy warren. It's a very small warren of rabbits, and when they come there, these rabbits don't fight. They're not territorial. They accept these wanderers. It seems as if they're accepting them with open arms. But then there becomes it's very clear that there's something more sinister happening. And Fiverr, he establishes his authenticity and his credentials as a seer, as a visionary, because he's the one who warns the group, no, don't go there, don't go there. These rabbits are horrible. And it turns out that these are rabbits that live near a farm, where the farmer often comes and traps some of the rabbits. And one of the interesting things is, in this warren, they never ask any questions. Every time somebody starts asking a question, they divert the subject. They change the subject so that the person is going to forget about that. And it becomes very curious. They can, like Hazel and Fiverr and the others, they can't understand how come nobody can ask a question. And then later on, they realize what's really happening here. And that is that these rabbits know that they're being picked off one by one by this farmer. And they decide to remain in that area because for them, the ease of their life, because they're often getting lettuce and vegetables from this farmer, they're getting fed. It's easier for them. They don't have to exert themselves so much. And yeah, so they lose a few people. You lose a few rabbits in the process. They're actually um, willing to accept the price of that for their ease of their life. So it's kind of creepy. It really is kind of creepy. And then when the realization strikes Hazel and the others, they decide to leave. They decide to leave, and these rabbits try to fight them, and they want to keep them. And no, they're terrible fighters. And one of them, Strawberry, he comes with them. Now, one of the intriguing things about Watership Down is how Richard Adams was also able to infuse the narrative with their own mythology. Like these rabbits have their own mythology. They believe they're kind of their own religion, their own mythology, and they tell each other stories. And what I found fascinating is the way they use the stories to bolster their own confidence. And there's one part in particular, you see later on when they come across this General Woundwort, who's a rabbit, kind of crazy rabbit. Okay, he's really, he's nuts. He's also very efficient, and he has the dose that they want. And when you get to that part, okay, the first maybe half of the book, I think it's separated into books. The first half of the book might be a little bit slow going for some of the readers, but as soon as you get to the part with General Woundwort, oh boy, does it ever get tense, and it really gets tense fast. I know this is a story that will often appeal more to boys than it will to girls, but the way I figure in a classroom, it's always a good idea to kind of cater to the lowest common denominator. Often the boys are the ones who have the most difficulty accessing fiction, especially. Boys are, I don't know, even my son, they like nonfiction better. And in some ways, this book kind of reads like nonfiction. In some ways, it does. So I think it would be very appealing to the boys. The girls will come along. Eventually, they'll come along, and girls are they tend to be more open to different types of literature. uh, like if you keep reassuring them that it'll be worth it, because I think one of the biggest things that kids want to know is when they read a book, am I going to feel like I wasted my time? They don't want to feel like they wasted their time. And honestly, with Watership Down, they won't. It's a good book. It's one of my favorites. I've probably read it about 12 times, and I keep going back to it. And yeah, it's a bit of a slog at the beginning, but honestly, that payoff is so, so juicy. When it happens, it's so juicy. And on it actually happens between Hazel and General Woundwort. No, not sorry, between Bigwig and General Woundwort. There's a momentous moment during the battle when Bigwig is defending their warren on Watership Down. There's a momentous battle between Bigwig and General Woundwort. And oh, I shouldn't give it away, but maybe I should, because you probably need to know this payoff. It's a moment when General Woundwort almost has Big Wig like dead. He almost has him dead, and then General Woundwort says something like, "Why don't you just give up? Why don't you just give up?" And Bigwig says, "Because my chief rabbit told me to defend the warren. I'm not giving up." And as soon as he says that, because all this time General Woundwort has assumed that Bigwig is the chief rabbit, and in his mind, the chief rabbit is always the strongest, the biggest, the biggest bully. And the funny thing is, earlier, the he actually has met the chief rabbit. He actually has met Hazel, and he found him not to be that impressive. That is like the key, like the fact that the leader is not necessarily the mightiest is something that General Woundwort cannot fathom. And that's what this story is all about. It's about leadership. And it shows Hazel's leadership through all of these different crises. It shows his leadership. It shows his strength of character. Now, as a writer, there's only one part that I found a little bit jarring, and that was the part when he's actually trash talking with a dog in a neighborhood. I think it's Nuthanger Farm or something like that. There's a dog or a cat. He's trash talking, and it just does not become Hazel. To me, that's not. It's out of character. That's a little quibble. It's my own little personal quibble that I found kind of hard to believe that Hazel would do that. And I think that Richard Adams, maybe he did that because otherwise, Hazel comes across a little bit too saintly, and maybe he wanted to show that hey, he's not a goody goody. He does have some negative sides to him, but I really didn't think it was necessary. Everything else in the book is just riveting, and unfortunately, apparently they did make a movie out of it, but it was really crappy. And I hope one day they'll make another movie out of it. I think it's the kind of book that will open your students' minds. And that's, I think, the best thing about literature, that it can make them see their own world in a through a different lens. And that's the kind of book that it is. I mean, they will think about their own society, the way social hierarchy is. They'll think about uh, they'll think about their own the role that their own religion or mythology has in their society. And there's one moment in particular where I thought it was really intriguing, that where Bigwig, because he's being sent by Hazel, he's being sent to go and infiltrate General Woundwort's system. And there's a moment when he asks for a particular story. One of the I think it's Dandelion. One of the rabbits is a real storyteller, and that's one of the reasons I like the book too, because I also love storytelling. But one of the rabbits is a real storyteller, and every time he's called upon to tell a story, it uplifts the spirits of these rabbits, and it helps them keep going. That's what you find is happening. But Bigwig asks for the story of the Black Rabbit of Inlay, and it's a pretty dark story, and yet when he asks for it, and later on, when you see what happens, you can actually understand why Bigwig asked for such a dark story at that moment. But basically, to me, this is a fantastic book. It's a book that can enrich your students. Um, it's a book that can really teach them a lot about the larger world and a lot about what to look for in terms of who they're either going to follow or how they're going to be the leader. I mean, not everybody can lead. You don't need always chiefs. You sometimes you need Indians as well. Thank you for listening.